It's 2 o'clock now, right?
Yes.
Because last week I was in Singapore opening another different project. And in Singapore, people arrive 15 minutes late. So, so I'm very impressed here. But it's such a great honor and pleasure to be back in Manchester and Chinese Art Center. Sally Lai, the director, and I have been talking about doing a project here for about past 4 years. And it was great to be finalizing and realizing this project here. So what I'm going to do for the next 35 minutes is to share with you about 5 or 6 different projects I've done before, and I won't talk much about the quartet project and the living room project, just because I want you to experience it in your own term, and we could discuss it later after you experience it. Okay, so John, may I have the light off? Thanks. Great, thank you. The first project is called Money for Art. As you can see, it was a $10 bill. And this was the very first participatory project I've done. And in 1994, I went to a cafe in San Francisco, because that's where I was living at that time. Took out this $10 bill, folded it into a sculpture. The whole process takes about 45 minutes. There were 9 people who were so fascinated with what I was doing with the money. So at the end of this 45 minutes, I asked each one of them, would they like to have this piece of artwork? All of them says, yes, I would love to have this $10. But I said, yeah, however, may I have your phone number? So I could call you every 6 months and find out what happened to this $10 bill. So 6 months later, as you can see, someone used it to buy moccasin, and somebody used it to buy Haagen-Dazs and banana. With this project, it's not about what you should do or what you shouldn't do with this money. It's more about, I'm actually much more interested in terms of what happened at that moment when this thing transformed into something else. So 12 months later, the person who told me it was stolen, I think he was a little bit embarrassed to tell me that he used it for something. So the most interesting person was the homeless person over here. I was a little bit hesitant to involve someone who was homeless in a project that deals with money. But my professor said, you should just go up and ask him if he wants to be a part of it. So he did. He was a Vietnam vet and lived around or stayed around the cafe for the past 5 years. So now when I go back to San Francisco, I often will go and visit him. He's still around. He has about 12 of these $10 bills in his wallet, because whenever his friend comes to visit him, he always open up and put it in his palm and say, look, I have a piece of artwork. No one ever say to him, why don't you use it to buy yourself something? So he was so happy, and I was actually very honored. I feel very honored and happy that he wanted to be a part of this process. Okay, so that was Money for Art. The second project I'll share with you is called Through Master's Eyes. This project was commissioned by the LA County Museum of Art in 2004. Most of you probably know that the LA LACMA, what's they call, is an encyclopedia museum. So they have one of the most interesting, or one of the best collection of Qing and Ming Dynasty painters' work by the name of Shi Tao in their collection. When I went there, the reason why I was able to do a project there was because the contemporary curator and the classical curator often have very heated discussion of what art is and what art could be. As you can just imagine how that conversation might go, or ended up. And so they decided to invite me to look at a classical collection, and maybe I could come up with a project that both of them agree is an artwork. I saw this painting by Shi Tao, which was a late 17th century Ming Dynasty painter. This was a part of a 7 images album, and I wanted to focus on the idea of imitation and copying in an Eastern and a Western tradition. In the Far East, that most of people would copy. Hi, welcome. Most of people would copy their teacher's work for 20 years. And then another 20 years, you can copy your teacher's work. And if you're good enough and still alive, you can do your little drawings, right? So that's 60 years there. But if, as a contemporary artist, if you're doing copying of other people's work as if it's your work, then it's really the death of your career. You really don't want to do that. So I thought it's a very interesting way of looking at this idea of imitation copying. What I did was I took this particular painting and asked two different sets of artists to copy this particular one. The way it worked was that each set has about 6 or 7 artists. One set were artists from living in America, and one set of artists were living in Taiwan. The first one from each set copied from the original Shitao, and the second one copied from the previous one, and the third one copied from the second one. So I'll show you the evolution. This is the original Shitao, and we'll look at what the Americans did. Or actually, they were not all Americans. There were other ethnic artists in there. So this is the first one. He is an American and had a Chinese painting training. So he copied from the Shitao. The second one copied from this one. It's already quite different. Third one. Fourth one. Fifth one. Absolutely no color already. Yeah, completely gone. Sixth one. A Pakistani, Shahzad Sikandar did this work. So we'll go back to the original Shitao, and I'll show you what the Taiwanese did. Very similar, in form and shades and color. Second one, third one, fourth one, and fifth one. So back in the museum, what I did was that I'll show you quickly. This is a kiosk I designed. So there was this book here. Right here, that is the facsimiles of these originals of the copies, because I wanted to reintroduce the idea of reading an album. When this particular album came in, which is over here, these over here, was composed of 7 images, but when it was taken into a Western collection, someone, we don't know who did, basically cut the album into just single page so they could be framed and viewed in a Western way. And until when I did this work, Lakma did not really know the order of each of these pages. So they because of this, they were able to find out what the order was. I see. So that's the first. It just happened the image I picked was the very first image of that album. So, and across the whole, this is the copies, the original of the copies from the Taiwanese, and the bottom is the original of the copies of the Westerners. So, and then, like I said before, this was facsimiles of the copies that you just saw. So people can have an idea of what is it to read an album. Yes. Okay. Excuse me. The third project was a commission again by this is a little bit different museum. It's called Jewish Contemporary in San Francisco. It was a fundraising project. They asked me, which it's quite bizarre, they would ask an artist that really doesn't produce any work that is worth of any financial value. They say, please come in and do a project that we can do some fundraising with. So this is a collection of spice box I found in their permanent collection, which were just absolutely beautiful. I wanted to address the idea of a spice box from a Taiwanese point of view. which is that we often talk about spice of life. So the sweet memory, sour memory, bitter memory. And with that idea in mind, I also look into the idea of a kite, actually the mythical goddess in Taiwan called Yuan. The myth was that the goddess of Yuan, she protects her children in many different forms. And she unfortunately married to a very rambunctious husband by the name of Rong Rong. And one day Rong Rong and Gong Gong, his buddy, were fighting and playing around and ripped a huge hole in the sky. So Nuwa was very sad that there was this hole in the sky, and she needed to go out and patch the sky, because otherwise her children would die. So what she did at night was that she went out and collected her children's dream, that's our dreams, and used those dreams to weave this huge textile fabric, flew against the sky to patch it. But then there was still a hole in the sky, and the only thing she could do was to throw herself against the sky to complete that patching. So that was a very moving mythical tale from my tradition. I want to incorporate that into the idea of spice box, and we'll see what I did. So there is Nuwa. I was able to get some funding from the Taiwanese government to go back to Taipei to work with a great living master who makes these amazing kites. And we were able to work with local weavers and also bamboo craftsperson to weave these certain type of silk that is dense enough that it catches wind, but also is light enough that it could fly. So there is Master Shay. So the idea is that whoever owns or got this kite during the auction is that I want this person to write his or her dream on the kite. And once it's all filled, please find a perfect day to fly the kite as high as you can and cut the string. So the kite will go up and patch the sky with your dreams. So there she goes. So I told the museum I don't want to know who owns the kite, and it's not my job to do that, and I really don't want to bother this person by saying, have you done your homework yet? It's really not about that. So I'm pretty sure someone still has this kite, and just taking time to fill her memories, writing dreams on the silk, and let her carry these dreams up and patch the ozone hole. Okay. The next project is called 归省计划, which was commissioned for the Ichikotomari Triennial in Japan. I arrived in this gorgeous little village in Ichikotomari in Niseka Prefecture. This town reminded me very much of my hometown Puli, which is in Taiwan. And there are similarity of this town to Puli. For example, one of them is that both towns are known for rice. This town in Japan is particularly known for rice that were grown for royal families. So there are patches in this village that were just for royal families' rice for centuries, for 200, 300, 400 centuries, 400 years. However, one sad thing about this town is that many young people are leaving town. No one wants to learn how to live as a farmer, okay? And also this town was, and still is, quite well known for textile, particularly for kimono, silk. Again, no one wanted to learn that, and the industry is dying very quickly after 1,000 years of this amazing art form. So when I was going around the village, there were these bulldozers pulling down these 400, 500 years old wooden structure because they were abandoned structures and become fire hazard. I went up to this one here. If you read the kanji or the Chinese character, it says Gongmingguan, which is meeting place for the villager. They were going to tear this down, and because nobody wanted to go there anymore. And I asked the farmer next to me and say, please contact me with your officer here, and I wanted to find out how much I can pay to save this building. It turned out to be about $2,000 only, which is very inexpensive for a beautiful 400 years old building. And so I used part of my funding to purchase this building. And after I purchased the building, I very quickly knew exactly what I wanted to do. So for the next whole year, I set up an artist residency in this village. So the idea is that there are going to be 12 artists coming in from outside of Japan, and each one of us will be paired with a local Japanese student from the city that want to learn from the local villagers the old knowledges of how this works. So the criteria or the idea of these artists is that there are 3 things they need to do. First is to clean up this amazing building so you can live there, and also as a gift for the next person. Second is to be of assistance and help to the local farmers. So we don't want to just suck up their resource and not be of any help. The third thing is that if you still have time, please do your own work, yeah, if you want. So most of us were quite tired after helping them in the farm, but that was great. So I put myself in the position of being the first artist because, as you can see, it's actually very, very messy. And I show up with a toilet brush and my assistant. And this looked like a very opulent room, tatami room. However, the tatami was infested with bedbugs, so we had to that bomb there. And after that, the farmers were all quite embarrassed that a foreign student or a foreign artist was living in an infested tatami room. So they gathered everybody, and within 2 hours, they were able to find enough money to purchase second-hand tatami for us. For the next week, everyone in the village just came in and helped us set up this community room that they used to know for the past 40, 50 years. And it was a really inspiring experience for me. And so after a week, what I did for them was that as a gift, I set up a Taiwanese drinking space because, as you know, Japanese love tea, and Taiwanese are also known for tea. So I was their tea master. Well, not really. I don't really know about any ceremony, but I was there to serve tea, whoever wants to come and share the tea with us. And Japanese are such polite people. If they hear, because they often leave the shoes outside, and if they see shoes, they would never come in and say, "What's up, dude?" They'll just stay out there and wait for people to come and leave, and then next one. The young women will always come in kimono. Also, every morning when we open the door, there's always a basket of homegrown vegetable, sometimes with notes of how to prepare these things. It was amazing because in the village, no one really has keys, locks to anything. Sometimes they would leave the key in their car, and you can just use the cars, but please fill up the gasoline if you use the car. So this is our dear neighbor who often come with his homemade pizza and food, had his cigarette, and then watch us eat. So we also had a lovely, lovely grandma who comes every morning and just opened the door and went into the kitchen to open the refrigerator to see what we needed, and come back in the later in the afternoon, fill the refrigerator with a home cooked food. So what I started to do in the morning before she came was that I woke up and started making dumpling for them and just put it in the refrigerator. Anybody can come and gather this, and it's a very, for me, a very rewarding exchange with the local community. And they often, again, come and just join us for dinner. This is the second artist I invited. So the way it works is very much like the through master slides. I pick the next one, and next one picks the following one. Sumei is a Chinese English artist who was born in Luxembourg and works in Berlin. Amazing artist. So she came and learned with a local master, ceramic master, of how to make these amazing, beautiful raku ceramics. And also she created these sparkling spider webs all around the building. So when after rain, of storm, you see this wooden building just sort of sparkles among the rice field. So Sumei invited Maria from Denmark, and many of the local children have never ever seen Caucasian, and for them this is a blonde person. Of course she wasn't blonde, but for them she was blonde. They often will show up early in the morning before going to school, bring her little gifts, and some of them were pets, meaning like tadpoles and frogs that they met in the rice field and brought it to her. And what Maria did for them was actually drill these holes on the wall for them to write their dreams, and then at the end patch up the hole. The idea was that after 40 years, they would take this wall down, and the children probably are 45, 47, will see what they wrote for themselves 40 years ago. The teacher really loved this idea, and she said, I would definitely not be here in 40 years, but I still want my children and my students to see what I want them to know about me. So that's what he did there. This was the last meal. It was a very sad meal. This was our daily ride into the farm and help them with the rice field. There's a little story after this project which is extremely moving for me. I did this project in 2006 in Japan, and I had a show in Taipei Mocha in Taiwan in 2007. So without me knowing it, there were 6 villagers heard about my show, and what they did was that they purchased a bus ticket to go to Niseko, and then from Niseko they took the Shinkansen, which is a train, to Tokyo, got onto an airplane, 3.5 hours later in Taiwan, show up in my opening 6 o'clock sharp. Very Japanese. So we continued this very beautiful relationship, and I often send them Taiwanese tea, and then they would send me rice. So a very, very moving experience for me in Japan. Okay. The next project is called the Mending Project, which is a very simple idea that I set in the gallery. Anybody can bring something for me to repair, clothing-wise, and I wanted them to do something for me, meaning when I repair their clothing, please just sit across from me, and so we can go through the repair together. The second thing is that after I repair their clothes, I would like to borrow their clothing for the duration of the show. They will all come back the last day of the exhibition, and that's when they get their repaired clothing. I wasn't, and I'm still not very good mender, so this is how I repair people's clothing, or something like that. Also, it's a way of celebrating and making mark the fact that this is a piece of clothing that you love so much that you don't want it to throw away. So you still have this care that you wanted to take care of. So that's why I made the big gesture of doing it. This photo means a lot to me because this young woman here heard of this project, so she brought something for me to mend. Went home, told the mother, and she loved the idea, so the mother came the next day. Both of them went home to the grandmother, and she loved the idea, so they all came, and so the next day we have 3 of them sitting there for me to repair their clothing. The last day of the exhibition, gradually when people come and pick up their clothing, the threads and the relationship between these threads and people start to go. This is about 4 in the afternoon. When the gallery closed at 6, absolutely nothing on the table, but there were about 420 pieces of mended clothing floating in New York somewhere. And someone actually came back to me about a year later and said, "Oh, you're the artist who did the mending." And he said when he was wearing one of the pieces of mended clothing, someone came up to see, you were at the mending because the person showed him he also had another mending thing. So that was a nice little story afterward. Yes. I did this for the Liverpool Biennial. Thank you for Lorenzo's invitation. So I thought that was a very interesting experience for me in Liverpool, especially when the accent in Liverpool was so difficult for me to understand. I just constantly smile and nod. Okay. So for the last two projects from New York, Liverpool, let's go to northern India, Sri Lanka, and then Queensland, in Brisbane in Queensland. So most of you know that the historical Buddha, this person called Siddhartha, was sitting underneath one particular Bodhi tree when he was enlightened, 2,500 years ago. So after that particular event, this tree became a sacred object. There were all these palaces and schools and universities that were built around this Bodhi tree. Around 2,300 years ago, there was a movement, an eradication of Buddhism going up. And the final goal was to cut this tree down. So at that time, King Ashoka's daughter, Princess Sugamita, heard of this destructive force coming in. So what she did was that she went into her father's palace, took a branch and hid in her hair, and escaped to Ceylon, which is currently Sri Lanka. This is a mural depicting that very important saga, a voyage from northern India to Sri Lanka. When I was invited to do a public art project for the inauguration of the Gallery of Modern Art in Queensland in 2008, they said, Mingwei, come and do a public art project. I say, okay, I wanted to plant one particular tree. It's not just any tree. I want to go to Sri Lanka and take a branch from this particular tree, which is what you're looking at right now. 2,300 years ago, this is a gigantic tree, but this was the tree that witnessed Buddha's enlightenment. I said, I want to go and just take a branch, and you know, at that time I was so naive, I had no idea what I was talking about. And so luckily and uncannily, the curator I was working with, Suhanya Raffle, was from Sri Lanka. She loved the idea, and she said, Mingwei, you know, this is almost impossible, but let's see how far we go. So it took us 4 years to go back and forth to Sri Lanka, and basically what really convinced the high priest of this temple that I'm doing an act of sincerity when I did this is that I explained to him that for modern day, for contemporary people, we go to temple, well, we don't go to temples or mosques or churches as much as people before. We often go to museums to have that sense of enlightenment. And he said, oh, now I understand why you want to do this. Come back in 8 months, I'll prepare this for you. So this is the mother tree, and the villagers were sitting around the mother tree chanting 24/7 for a whole week to prepare this eventual departure of this little sapling. Underneath the parasol was where they were carrying this one sapling that the high priest prepared for me. So there she was. When the high priest handed this to me, he, instead of chanting in Pali, he prayed in English, and I think it's really for me to understand what he's saying. So he told the tree that you are going to be in an exotic and beautiful land called Australia that no holy tree has ever ventured to. So your job as a holy tree is that you need to grow as strong and as big as you can and create shade and shadow for the children and animal there, and grow to 4,000 years. So there I was with the two angels, that's what I call them, that helped me kind of steer for the last 4 years with all these process I needed to go through. So I, again, very naively, I took the little sapling and was boarding Qantas airline, and they stopped me at the door. I said, what is that you're carrying in your hand? Anyway, so I was not successful to smuggle this holy tree into Queensland, and we needed to use DHL to send it to Queensland. This tree stayed in the quarantine for 6 months. It just happened that the custom officer who was taking care of these exotic plants plus this holy tree was from Sri Lanka, and her house was only about a mile away from the sacred site. And she told me that she really believes that it was reincarnation of goodwill and good gesture that she was giving this holy task of taking care of the tree of Buddha. So in 2008, I went back and worked with a local Buddhist community, Buddhist nun from Taiwan, to create a ceremony that every year on Buddha's birthday, which is May 2nd, they will come and chant to the Bodhi tree 24 hours to imbue it with holy and sacred energy. Somebody sent me this picture of the father and the child taking a nap there. And I went back last year, so this is how big she is now. They just sent me a tree report because, it's in the permanent collection of the museum, right? So they sent me a tree report, and now she's about 35 feet tall. And they last for 4,000 years, so it's really quite magical to realize that this sacred tree is going to outlast anybody and everything. They also told me something beautiful is that not only the Buddhist community will gather around this tree, the other religious or spiritual people will gather these trees. Even the indigenous population would do ceremony among this tree. So I'm very happy to hear that it's not only the Buddhist people who will come here. Oh, hello, Gloria. Okay, last project, the Guernica in sand. So this is one of the most iconic and powerful painting by Picasso, and it was his reaction of the 1937 bombing of Guernica in Spain. He was in Paris at that time. When he heard of this event, he only took about 10 days to finish this particular painting. So I took this painting into my practice by making into a very large performance piece. There are 3 phases to this particular this particular piece from me. So I'll show you the 3 different phases here. The first phase is that for the first 7 weeks, this is what you see. We use about 12 tons of sand, and it's fairly large sand painting. Underneath the light, which is here, these you can see there were buckets and a little seat there. So that kind of tells you that it's not a complete piece. So that's the first 7 weeks of this installation. On the 8th week, Monday's sunrise, I walked down to the sand painting to finish the last part of it. This gesture also signals to the audience that one person from the audience could now walk onto the sand painting. So it was always one person, while hundreds of other people just observe this dynamic between these 2 people. This was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Very, very transformed. I also had that artificial rock there just so people can rest emotionally and physically to observe what's happening around them. Before sunset of that Monday, I stopped the last person from walking and just spent some time patching up this piece, but of course is of not much use. Yeah? At the sunset, myself and 3 other assistants, each one of us had a broom, and we started brushing the sand toward the middle. So this is the end and the beginning. Actually, it's the beginning of the 3rd phase. You could tell it was a Guernica, but it's a completely different artwork after 10 hours of performance. So this was at sunset, and 10 hours before this was at sunrise. So that is all the project I'll bore you with, and thank you. Yes.